Hi, welcome to Studio C at Verge San Francisco 2013. I'm Joan Michelson, the host of the Sidebars going on here as well. And I'm here with Mark Ferran, who is the Commissioner of the California Public Utility Commission. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So my question for you is, the utility industry and distributed energy in general is innovating incredibly quickly right now. And yet, obviously investors want some stability, they need reliability to know how to invest. How do you develop regulations and how do you run a public utility commission in the face of a lot of moving parts here? I mean, literally and figuratively. You know, you've got the industry is innovating incredibly quickly. The sources of energy are innovating incredibly quickly. Smart metering is, you know, coming on board, but in pieces, and it's still trial and error, and yet you have investors who want reliability. So how do you do that?
Well, it's not easy. We're trying to balance many different things at the Public Utilities Commission. We need to ensure that rates are fair and reasonable, that the system is reliable and safe, and that we meet our environmental goals in the state. And so we're continually trying to balance those different dimensions. Now, what you mentioned is balancing the need for innovation and the need to attract capital into the space, and to me, those are not inconsistent with one another. The utility industry typically has not been known as a huge innovator in its own right.
To put it gently.
To put it gently, they're used to running very large scale, very highly reliable infrastructure projects. And those projects will typically have an investment life of 20 to 50 years in length. And so it's very important that we provide a framework from a regulatory standpoint that allow investors in those kind of long-lived assets to earn a fair return over the long term. So part of what we do when we set the rates that consumers pay is we include within those charges a cost to cover the expected return on the long-term assets that are being invested for the benefit of the long-term health of the grid. Now, at the same time, the Commission has had a number of different policies to encourage innovation around the margin. Such as the California Solar Initiative, which was started in 2003. Now, this is a series of policies that encourage individuals to put solar panels on their roofs to generate power for their own homes.
Like cogeneration, is that feeding it back to the grid?
Well, it's a form of that. It's what's known as net metering. So to the extent that they're using the power in their own homes, they get the benefit of that. But to the extent that they have an excess, that gets exported back to the grid, and they receive the economic value of that in a reduction of their bills. Now, that policy has been enormously successful. Combination of net energy metering and the subsidies that were embedded in the solar initiative in having rooftop solar take off in the state of California. We now have something close to 168,000 customers across the state that are beneficiaries of their home net metering.
Well, that's a nice number, but in the face of the millions of people who live here, that's a tiny fraction.
Well, but it does, I think, show the way, laying out the way to the future, and that's where other policy measures come into play. I mean, we are looking very carefully at how we balance continuing to have incentives for people to generate solar, generate their own electricity, while still paying for the cost of the grid. And the panel I was on discussed, I think, one of the most important barriers to that, and that is financing. Typically, to date, it has been only those people who have access to capital themselves to fund the self-generation on their home. We have seen spring up private sector companies that are now in the business of providing the capital. It's in the form of a solar lease, whereby they will own the facilities on your home, and they will provide the financing for that, in exchange for which there's a long-term agreement where whereby you as the consumer get part of the net benefit of the self-generation, and part of the benefit goes back to repaying the lease on the.
Well, that's very interesting. And just to close out, we also saw a concept pitched this morning called Retro Fund, which was in effect crowdfunding for these kinds of initiatives, where you have investors through crowdfunding mechanisms pay for the retrofit on your house and the reduction, which is amazing. Mark Ferran of the California Public Utilities Commission, thank you very much for joining us, and stay tuned. We'll have more of Studio C in just a moment.